We're live from Tallahassee. It's like Saturday Night Live, but we're here. But listen, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and your members about the very interesting, certainly finish to the 2020 legislative session. So what I'm going to do is first give just a little background on who we are for those who haven't met the Capital Alliance Group before. Talk a little bit about kind of the highlights of the session, and then kind of drill down into the league's priority legislation, and then some of the issues. Obviously, there's been a lot of activity. It goes without saying, post session, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, Eddie will have Taylor, who is will want to mention. If he doesn't, that his wife and he just had a baby yesterday, so I think he's still in the hospital, waiting to get out and be released. And Lauren Gallo is with us from Southwest Florida today as well. So again, thank you very much. Well, listen, it's been an interesting year, and we enjoyed representing the League of Women Voters. It was a learning experience for all of us, as you well know, and we appreciated the constant feedback and involvement of members. You have a very broad group of folks with a lot of passion and a lot of issues that you care about, policy issues you care about. So I think, in general, the big picture is one of the things that we tried to do as your advocate up here is help communicate your message effectively and provide you with feedback from legislators and agency folks, the governor's office, the Secretary of State's office on your issues, and also to bring you face to face with some of those, which I think has been a little bit challenging in the past. The other big issue, kind of method that we talked a little bit about is trying to really focus your brand on the key issues that are really core to the league. You have a great brand reputation statewide, and you do have a very strong brand in Florida, in the Capitol. And so what would happen is, I know you're covering a lot of different policy issues when, for example, the league would take a position on environmental issues. People would go, well, why is the league doing that? Because I think it was new to them that you have somewhat of a broad policy agenda. So one of the things we try to do is to really help focus that, strengthen your message, not dilute it. And I think we were successful in that throughout the course of the year. It was a learning experience for all of us, as you know. But before I jump into this, I want to just mention, our legislative presentation we did in Tallahassee with members that came to town was great fun. It was informative for us. It was great to see the passion that you bring to the table. And again, so we're really pleased to represent you. Now, as you well know, not all of your issues are well loved in Tallahassee. Some are, some aren't. For the most part, we believe, our firm believes that they're the right issues. And so what we wanted to do is to really help channel that communication in a productive and positive way, even if it was in opposition to issues. And I think you had both Patty, you and Trish, and a number of people who you had come up and testify in committees and in the meetings that we set up for you. I think we were very successful in doing that. So let me jump into the actual session itself. As I mentioned, there's been a lot going on since then. The legislative session, 60 days, was supposed to end March 13th. It didn't. It ended on the 19th. Later, following week, the budget was that complicated. They couldn't finish it on time. And so they left on that Saturday, the 14th, came back after they had 72 hours to review the budget and voted it out. That last 2 weeks of the session, the coronavirus issue was starting to percolate throughout the state, certainly across the country. And the entire environment within the Capitol started to shift. It became apparent that there was something on the horizon that would have an impact on the state budget, principally for healthcare issues to start. But no one really had anticipated the impact on business closures, safe at home, stay at home orders, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll get a little bit into that. But when we ended the budget session, We had, I'll give you just quick highlights. It was a $93.2 billion budget, significantly higher than the preceding year. A lot of very positives on the budget side, and certainly we had our voices with the league in those, but we had a $500 million teacher pay increase, 3% across the board raises for state employees, which was remarkable, brand new, $100 million for Florida Forever, $650 million for the Everglades and waterways. Interesting enough, the battle over Visit Florida, the state's tourism marketing effort, got funded at $50 million, supported by the governor. Who would have thought at that time how critically that's going to be going forward? A big win for a lot of different constituents, and certainly the league, the Sadowski funds, which fund affordable housing around the state. Really, for the first, and I've been involved in this for a long time, for the first time that I can remember in many, many, many years, it was fully funded. Really against some of the protestations from the House, but the Senate and the governor funded it at $350 million. That last week, as COVID started to slowly emerge, the legislature put aside $28 million for emergency health services, and another $300 million for potential reserves should they need it. A quick snapshot on the budget, on the legislative policy process in terms of bills filed. As we talked about before, we have a very conservative House controlled House and Senate, Republican controlled Senate and House. 3,578 bills filed. That's a lot of bills. 2,600 amendments filed throughout that, but only 207 bills passed. So if you do the math, it's really about 6%. So all these issues that get filed and move forward, and the issues that we fight for on behalf of the league, at the end of the day, if you roll the dice, you really realize that very few pieces of legislation are going to pass. So we'll kind of drill down now into our post-session issues, some of the post-session issues, but winners and losers and high priorities for the league. I do want to mention, obviously, that we'll come back to it. That budget figure of $93.2 billion is fragile right now. As you all know, unemployment figures in Florida, business closings, school closings, and everything else, healthcare costs have jumped dramatically. The governor has not received the budget yet, which is somewhat unusual. He typically has his veto issues already identified by now. We've spent some time with his staff 3 weeks ago on various priorities. But he has said, don't give me the budget yet. Let's see how this virus works its way through, because there is a good possibility that he has said that he will veto enough money to provide the resources necessary to keep Florida moving. We certainly wouldn't want things like Sadowski cut and others, but there's a reality check there. There is some conversation, and we'll let Taylor talk about this a little later, rumors going on about the legislature coming back for special session, which they may need to do anyways. Federal funds coming into the state need to be authorized by the legislature to be spent. So there's a good possibility they'll be back here in the summer. And it may have to readjust the budget depending upon where the state is. So we'll come back to a little bit of that. The Senator Galvano, President Galvano has indicated that they have $4 billion in reserves. You have a $93 billion budget. They have $4 billion in reserves. He thinks that's enough to maintain and cover any costs without having to veto, some of these really important issues. Florida moves on, obviously, after this virus goes away. So those are critical issues that we continue to face. And again, it's a very dynamic process. Let me just jump into some of the high priority legislation. I'll track through these. We went back, Patty, and tried to count the number of bills you had on your original monitoring list. I think there were 18 pages, and so we realized that just to ensure that we could capture your priorities, we tried to triage that in terms of real high priorities. And so Let me mention a couple of things that we at the end of the session really worked on, and we sent this out in our session legislative report. Senate Bill 70, panic alarms, really Alyssa's law, which was important. The Parkland parent wanted to improve the communications at schools. That passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate. That was a big priority for the league. There are a couple of them that did pass that we weren't too thrilled about and spent a lot of time testifying against. I think the big one was Senate Bill 404, the parental consent bill and its companion. It's still awaiting the governor's action, but that bill, as you all know, is one of the most contentious bills filed during the session. It would force girls under the age of 18 to get notarized approval from a parent or guardian. Otherwise seek a hearing or gain consent from a judge before terminating a pregnancy. Very contentious bill. We have some great testimony from league members. At the end of the day, that bill passed along party lines. Republicans voted for it, Democrats voted against it. We had one Republican House member who voted against the bill out of conscience. So that was a good friend of ours. It was pleasant to see. Moving on to another contentious bill and a big issue, one that is still pending, is Senate Bill 1794, the Constitutional Amendments Bill. We spent a lot of time on these two bills, 1794 and House Bill 7037, that really changes the way citizens of Florida would amend their Constitution. This is not a constitutional ballot. This is the process by which citizen initiatives get approved. We had some very interesting conversations with league members, with Senator Brandis and Representative Grant, with Patty and the league members, and we both shared their ideas and they shared theirs. But this, still awaiting the governor's signature, but this bill really changes the requirements for getting an initiative on the ballot. I can go into some of that detail, but there's some critical issues in terms of what the shelf life of signatures might be. If they're collected today, how long would they last? That was shortened. There's a requirement. There's a fiscal impact on these citizen initiatives, and in big bold letters to state whether or not it has a negative fiscal impact or no fiscal impact. We had to work hard to get them to put in that it has a positive fiscal impact, which they did eventually. And really creates, some people could say it's a hurdle to getting these initiatives moving forward, which I think is our position. Others believe it, who supported the bill, that it would ensure that not just billionaires are financing petitions. It makes it much more expensive to gather signatures and verify signatures, and the thresholds change. So I can come back to more detail on that, but we worked very hard on that one. It was held up for a while at the very end, but finally passed. I think on another voting bill, there was a Senate Bill 1312, a House Bill 1005 about voting systems. The supervisors of elections were very supportive of this. We had some very positive conversations to clarify the validity of these optical scanning recount technologies. The league originally opposed it. I think we got to a point where they were neutral on it. Our local supervisor elections here, Mark Early, was very positive on it, very sensitive to the league's position, and appreciated the opportunity to chat with you towards the end of the session, and that's moving forward. The Secretary of State did support that bill, so we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, there are much bigger and there are big issues coming up on early voting that we'll address, and I think Patty, you and I have chatted about the letter the Florida Supervisors of Elections have passed, as this COVID crisis and stay-at-home crisis is going to dramatically impact early voting issues. Let me tick through some of the bills supported by the league. Domestic violence was a big issue. House Bill 1087, we supported that. That whole initiative, that whole bill was really initiated with the problems that surfaced with the executive director of the Coalition for Domestic Violence and her salary. That was the fastest bill I think ever passed in the legislature, and the governor signed that. Another bill that we supported, House Bill 43, child welfare, certain standards for children in certain county dependency cases. That we supported that bill. The governor has not signed that as well, but that passed. Again, Alyssa's law, which passed, which we supported. House Bill 81, healthcare for children. Again, waiting for the governor's actions. Actually, the governor has not signed a whole lot of bills. They've been totally consumed with what they're doing. Let me tick through some other ones here. We had a lot of educational bills, most of which we supported. Charter school bills, we were not too supportive of. Florida Kid Care Program was signed by the governor. That was a big one. House Senate Bill 348. Keep Our Graduates Working, House Bill 115, again, helping graduates with career training programs, etc. Petroleum cleanup, housing discrimination, environmental resource management, were all bills that we supported. They're all waiting the governor's actions, but very positive about that. Let me see what else we've got here. We've kind of talked through some of the issues that we did not support. We spent a lot of time on those. And we think that a couple that didn't pass, the actual ballot initiative amendments to change the ballot initiatives will probably be back next year. But the landscape could change dramatically. And again, what we've done this year is, for those of you who follow this crazy legislative process, we always like to say, you know, people who really care about this stuff are like the 1% deviants, right? I mean, that really track all this stuff daily. But we fall into that category. This year, we had an early legislative session. They alternate the schedule by 2 months every other year to address the need for elections and campaigns, etc. So this year, the regular session started in January, ran through February, the first part of March. Interim committee meetings started in September, October, November, and December. Next year, we'll start in January with those interim committee meetings after elections, and it'll run till the beginning of May. So with what's going on here, we campaigns have been
sidelined.
For the most part. Can you hear me still? Patty, can you hear me?
Hi, Jeff. Yes, we are able to hear you perfectly. Okay. Taylor is also on the line and unmuted, so I believe he came in there just for a moment.
Okay. Taylor, do you want to comment on that, and then I'll talk about some of the posts?
No. I think that was well said. I just think there's a lot of great unknowns, if you will, even with respect to when the legislature will return, when the governor will lift some of these stay-at-home recommendations and business shutdowns, and the reopening task force is meeting and submitting reports. It's grown in the last week since its inception and maiden meeting, if you will. I think there's a lot of, as you touched on, there's everybody's probably keen to the situations with regard to the unemployment fiasco. There were another 500,000 unemployment applications in the last 48 hours or so. And still to this date, less than 5% have actually received compensation. So that's another thing. Additionally, for the traditional folks that would otherwise not qualify for unemployment, such as your gig workers or your self-employed folks and so forth, they are waiting for the monies that were authorized by Congress to pass down to the states, Florida in particular. A big article in the New York Times today on the Florida unemployment crisis and how tough it is for folks to get by in lieu of not receiving unemployment compensation and so forth, and the state being such a large state impacted economically and financially by COVID-19. So again, when Jeff was going over the schedule for the legislative session and interim committee weeks, I think a lot of that is unknown. And then also on April 2nd, as he said, President Galvano sent out a memo discussing $2 billion in reserves that the legislature and state economists have identified. And additionally, there's another 12 another 12 plus million coming down, or 12 billion coming from the feds. So potentially, the governor could act accordingly, use this crisis to slash some things that look good politically. But as of present date, hopefully he won't need to do that because there's plenty of money coming from Congress and so forth, and then money's in reserves. But whether or not we meld into what some other states have done with telephonic virtual votes and assembly meetings and so forth, that's all stuff to contemplate in the future, because certainly life as we once knew it will no longer be, in my opinion, for the next 18 to 24 months.
Thank you, Taylor. We have a question from one of our members regarding what you had just said. Regarding, or maybe what Jeff said as well, regarding the delay from the governor on the signing of bills, are there any upsides to this? What are the downsides? She'd like to hear from you and Jeff on this. Do these, the lack of the bills being signed require any action, in your opinion, by league members? Right.
Well, Jeff Jeff could weigh in on this, but this is Taylor speaking. I mean, some of these bills go into effect, are self-actualizing in the sense that the governor doesn't veto them by a certain date, they go into law. Others, politically, things, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, if the governor, takes away some of his attention to focus on, political, policy things that are, pushed and opposed by lobbyists, that, he could be, berated for that to a certain extent. But I don't see, other than the budget itself, that's the one thing that the legislature has to constitutionally pass each and every year. Everything else is relatively meaningless to a certain extent. So
they have it, as Taylor pointed out, so the bill has an enactment date. Each of these bills have different enactment dates. Some of it happens on the 1st of July, and some of it happens upon once it's signed by the governor. The governor, some of these bills have just not been sent to him. He has a certain amount of time once he gets a bill, 15 days to review and either sign it, veto it, or let it become law without his signature, which happens a lot. So I wouldn't read anything into this in terms of his disposition necessarily. His staff, just does all the reviews of everything, have already made those decisions for the most part. So,
and some things are very symbolic and ceremonial in the sense when you have these big, bill signings that are done in regional locations and at regional hubs and so forth. So, but again, all the agencies and the governor's office has been solely focused on, combating COVID-19 safely and effectively, and exploring options on how, we get our economy moving forward again.
Thank you. Are you ready for some more questions, Taylor and Jeff? I've got questions coming in from our members.
Always.
Okay. We have a question from Nikki. This was supposed to be the year of the environment in the legislature because of the support of the governor. There were some advances which may be undermined during the upcoming review of the budget. What environmental and growth management bills did you lobby for and or against, or for modifications? Why? What success? How will you be involved to protect the environmental allocations in the upcoming budget review?
Well, we had a list of, I don't have the entire list in front of me. We actually have these different policy areas, obviously, but you know, if you look on our report, certainly petroleum cleanup, we killed there was an emergence of a fracking bill again. Once, you know, we certainly proposed that. The environmental resource management bill, we supported.
Which was the Clean Waterways Act by Senator Mayfield and Senator Bradley and Albritton and Harrell. We were supportive of.
Yeah, and of course, I think, you know, the big the money. I mean, the funding for the Everglades and for waterway cleanup, and $100 million for Florida Forever purchasing was very strong. I mean, I think towards the end of the session, you saw the very prominent environmental activists, lobbyists, advocacy groups, very positive, really, about the budget. To my knowledge,
sure, including.
Taylor, to my knowledge, I don't think there was a really adverse environmental bill that passed. I have to go back and reflect on that, but nothing that popped up.
Not that I'm seeing as in a quick double reference here at our folders and our catalog. I'm not seeing anything. I mean, the Everglades Foundation, certainly dubbed it a good year. They were very complimentary of the governor and his efforts for the environment and water.
Listen, but on that, just on that issue, I think how remarkable it is that we forget. What's the crisis du jour and what happened before. The Panhandle here, we're in Tallahassee. The Panhandle here is still not fully recovered from the Hurricane Michael, and this COVID issue, certainly exacerbates it. But there are vast swaths of North Florida that still have blue tarps. Trees are down. Agriculture has been diminished. Housing is a critical issue still, from all the way to Bay County, Panama City. So there are, thank God for Sadowski funding and some other stuff, but from the environmental perspective.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff, I think additionally from an environmental perspective, you could talk a little bit about, our work and others' work with, the electrification process and build out in Florida to make it more eco-friendly and green for, electric vehicles and so forth, which was similarly unprecedented effort by our legislature and certainly very environmentally sound practices.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about, we represent Tesla, and so the state has moved forward. The governor's been super supportive, Department of Transportation. So they passed some legislation to create a strategic plan for electric vehicle infrastructure charging across the state. So that there's a big push, and there's some funding from a VW settlement fund that is going to fund a lot of that. So there, to that point, it's going to really promote electric vehicles.
And that is certainly something that the league is very much in favor of, is the proponent advocating for electric vehicles. So thank you for that.
If anybody wants to buy a Tesla, we can direct you to a store in your neighborhood.
Correct.
And let me say, we did go back and forth on the environmental bill 712. We eventually came out and signed on to a very large veto letter on that bill. And I do not believe that bill has been sent over to the governor, but we ultimately found that there were some components of that bill a bit problematical, and we just couldn't get behind supporting it. So we listened to our environmental partners and joined in onto the veto campaign. I have other questions here. I have quite a bit in front of me. This is from Mary. The legislature seems intent on eroding the rights of municipal and county governments to establish laws of regulation in their best interests. The erosion of home rule has a detrimental effect on many league championed issues and priorities. As I understand, there were over 27 bills that contain provisions undermining home rule and of the rights of individuals to monitor governmental actions and decisions. These preemption clauses impact many of our citizen groups. Are you actively advocating against this practice? If so, how?
100% on a variety of factors, not just on behalf of the league, but anything that seeks to preempt local governments. We almost 100% of the time oppose, and we happen to also represent a handful of local government clients.
Correct. But it's a, hate to use the metaphor of a virus, but particularly the House of Representatives every year comes up with these, I'm going to use the term pejoratively, but ridiculous, many instances, preemption.
Power grabs.
Well, the remarkable thing is many of these legislators are former local government officials who all of a sudden come up here, drink the water, and think they know better. And oftentimes these issues are promoted by particular interests that can't get a fix at a local level, and talk a legislator into filing a bill that does it statewide. I mean, you can talk about ride sharing. There's a whole variety of things. AT&T has done it a couple times. The league, we work very closely with the League of Cities and the Florida Association of Counties. We represent local counties and cities. And so we're very active in that. I mean, sometimes it's an uphill battle, for sure. But I think this year, the league will tell you that it was on whole positive in terms of stopping those.
Yes, we agree. We have a question from our state.
Even go back just to piggyback on that real quickly. I mean, you could go back to Governor DeSantis's decision to veto the plastic, the statewide ban on plastic straws following his first session as governor. So sometimes there is light at the end of the tunnel, irrespective of the legislature's actions to continually take away control from where they once originated.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Well, we have another question, this one from our state healthcare chair, Diane. Where in the state could the league focus our efforts on Medicaid expansion that would have a chance to influence members of the majority party in supporting this effort? Will we have a better opportunity in getting this passed if there is a special session?
Well, this is a big issue. Obviously, you probably know that Medicaid is out of a $93 billion budget. The Medicaid budget is about $30 billion. Healthcare. I mean, it's a huge piece of it. So over the years, since Governor Scott was here, they have refused to accept federal Medicaid expansion funding because there is a very small percentage state match. And the thinking behind this is even, despite the fact that many more children, for example, would be served and have health care, the fear that will grow and the match will change and it'll cost Florida more money seems to be the rationale behind that. If the question is where should we look geographically and politically for members to target certain members, I mean, the two of the top of my head are, the incoming Speaker of the House, Chris Sprowls from the Tampa Bay area, and Senate President Wilton Simpson from Tremblay, and they're going to be making these decisions. Historically, the Senate's been a little more moderate. The House has fought this over.
Right.
So I think it's not an issue that has not thoroughly discussed and advocated routinely.
But it is an issue that's routinely been relatively partisan to a certain extent. I mean, but like Jeff said, they've been more amicable. It's been more palatable on the Senate side in previous years.
It's one of those things, it would make sense, right? If you really cared about healthcare and what positive preventative healthcare does for the other costs down the time frame for sick children, sick people going to the emergency room, right? I mean, we're seeing that now. I think Medicaid, I could be wrong about this. I mean, the federal government, the money's flowing from the federal government under the CARE Act and subsequent pieces of legislation. We're talking about trillions of dollars. There is a huge focus on healthcare and healthcare workers and hospitals and county health departments. And, how do we, because this isn't over, and how do we prevent the next one? There certainly will be a big focus on healthcare services over the next, 24 months for sure. And, hopefully Medicaid could get wrapped into that. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of funding the federal government has left to provide in addition to what they've already done. I mean, I'm not sure if Medicaid expansion in other states, as a concept is going to be affected by that adversely. All these rules and all these trends and all this history is going to be reshaped.
Thanks, Jeff. Another question from Beth. Was there any additional bill action on the roads to ruin?
On the roads to ruin.
Yeah.
I got it. What is it?
I was about to say, what's that bill number again?
That's a movie I saw.
I like that. I like that name.
One of those movies I've been watching too much of. Anyway,
a Netflix documentary. Yeah, that's right.
There was no could be. There was no there's certainly some protests and comments about it, but it was such a priority for the Senate President, Bill Galvano, who was moving out, and Senator Simpson is becoming Senate President, that nobody was going to touch it. And it's been funded. The preliminary parts of it are funded. I don't think the designs are complete. There's still Department of Transportation is still working with communities on those routes in general. I mean, specifically in certain areas, but I don't see that being held up.
Okay, question on juvenile justice from our state juvenile justice chair, Charlotte. We have advocated heavily to establish a minimum age for a child to be arrested. Both the House and the Senate agreed on an age. At the very end of the session, the bill was not passed. What happened behind the scenes to cause this?
I don't, Taylor, you may know, I don't, we tracked that bill. We saw where the ages were shifted. The House took the age up from the original, we thought was agreed to.
Was it, no, that was the, wasn't that that was is that the felony threshold? I missed the first half of the question. I apologize. Okay. I apologize. Juvenile justice. I can find the answer out before the end of the call from the Florida Juvenile Justice Association, but I'm not sure politically what happened with that.
I don't know what, I mean, to Taylor's point on juvenile justice and sentencing guidelines and everything else, the House was much more conservative than Senator Brandes in the Senate on correction reform. Obviously not much passed, right? Senator Brandes had a very bold plan that would, positively affect the Department of Corrections and their caseload and their finances, and release prisoners who, were elderly and, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of that didn't happen, even though he's the chair of the Criminal Justice Appropriations Committee in the Senate. But I think who would have thought you're seeing now the impact that COVID is having on these prisons and the early release of some of these folks to eliminate pandemic. But I don't remember, other than I know that the incoming Speaker Sprowls was behind the change of that age threshold.
For the bill we're talking about, for the kids, that was attached to the school safety bill, right? That didn't make it past at the end. Is that what we're talking about? Because I was told that we didn't have an appetite for it. Like the House and the Senate at the last minute decided they didn't want an appetite. That's why the school safety bill was not passed, and those kids I think they changed it from like the age like 7 to like 8 or something like that.
8 or 10, yeah.
Yes, they changed
So
the age.
I was told that there just wasn't an appetite. They didn't care about it enough. And so that's why they just let it die.
Okay, it's helpful, thank you.
We have a question from one of our education leaders in the league. Education bills in the last few years have been train bills that load a few good things in with many terrible things, like private school vouchers with no accountability or transparency. Is there any way to require single issue bills?
No. You know, typically the bills that are filed are for the most part single issues or single category issues. That doesn't mean they don't include multiple components. As these bills move forward, of course, as you know, they get amended onto other bills. As I mentioned, we had 3,578 bills filed, only 207 passed. So from a lobbyist perspective, the strategy is if your bill's not moving, you want to find a bill to amend it to. So that's what everybody does. Members do it as well. And so there's that strategy. So if you've got an educational bill that's not moving, or you got a positive one and something that's maybe not so positive, the bill sponsors try to put together a package that may smell a little bit, but maybe have enough votes to move. So to your point, you're right. At the end of the session, again, with very few bills passing, the education chair, typically in the House and the Senate, can dictate, what a bill is going to look like. There are some germanity, I don't know more details, but there are some germanity issues. You couldn't put an environmental bill per se onto an education, right? That's a violation of a rule. So to your point, Patty, you have to be what they call germane. But there's a lot of ways to define germanity at the end of the session when leadership wants to pass something. So unfortunately, there is not a requirement that bills that pass are single subject and have to be the same bill that started. So.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have is, do you foresee any bills coming down the pike for the next legislative session that would have to do with vote by mail or early voting? I mean, these are issues right now that our supervisors of elections are wrestling with in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah. I assume you've shared the information from the supervisors of elections letter requesting the governor to modify current statutes on early voting?
Yes, we have, and we put out a press release, thanking the supervisors and asking that the governor, honor their request, which she has not yet done. Correct.
And as I mentioned, Patty, I talked to the Secretary of State's office yesterday, and had conversations with them about this, and they would, they would love to have us, our firm, reach out to the governor's office to support it. They're still waiting for the direction from the governor. I don't think that's a. He's been asked about it by the press routinely, and his response is, let's just, we're not that close yet. I mean,
no, exactly. A lot of that's to be determined. I think, on a variety of factors, the way we vote moving forward, particularly if there's no vaccination in sight, not readily available testing. Again, a lot of things are going to be different, particularly with a, resurgence expected in the fall, possibly coinciding with influenza season.
So I know they're really focused on this. I had a couple conversations with Mark earlier, our local supervisor. And, they're waiting, as you know, on that letter with the governor. And I believe, my sense would be that he would assist with some of that for sure, in terms of early voting, other locations, et cetera. The idea is not to, it's fairly transparent. If you leave it the way it is, it's going to totally, create obstacles for people to vote, without a doubt. And then, of course, as you know, there's money coming down to the state for supervisors of elections, local governments, to assist with voting this fall. Mr. Early had asked us to check with our congressional delegation to help support that. So to your point, Senator Brandis has commented that he would certainly consider some legislation to assist as this goes forward. Not quite sure what that means, but I would assume that there would be some legislation. I'm not quite sure what it would entail, but there would be.
Okay. Another question, what about the some 173.7 million that is supposed to come from Washington? Will Florida Department of Elections take the lion's share, or will it go to the districts?
That's the point I was just making, and I haven't seen that. I haven't seen the formula that's for distribution, but Mark Early tells me that there is a formula, and they have no concerns about that.
Okay, good. That's good news. Another question, and this is a good question for us all to think about. How do you recommend we approach the 2021 session for maximum impact?
Well, I think we need to, early in the fall, you need to develop your, priority list. Obviously, until the election in November, new members, there are no bills that can be filed really. There can be bills that are put into bill drafting, but nothing can be filed. So you really won't see bills, merging until December, January.
Right. To anticipate, what to take positions on and so forth. But certainly narrowing the scope a little bit was probably helpful to the overall.
And on a proactive basis, right? If you have, and I think probably focusing on your core issues, elections and voting, if there's a bill that you would like to put together, right? I mean, proactively, of key issues that you think need to be put into statute. I mean, I think we ought to do that. It creates a discussion point counterpoint as us move forward. And certainly we can find legislators to file the bills for us. But I think one of the things we're going to try to do is, for you, as we hear, constantly we're involved in the constant political dialogue, the blog dialogue. I mean, it's like it's constant as this virus crisis continues and it gets closer to election. That there will be ideas that'll surface regarding a number of these topical areas. I don't think you'll have a real clear idea of what's happening in the environmental space per se, unless there's a crisis. It's usually always respond to crises, right? Similar with education, it's going to be a big problem. I mean, this whole online learning issue, those of you who still
distance learning, absolutely,
has become super problematic. And the financial impact to universities, state colleges, public schools is huge. And so you may see all sorts of legislation that begins to try to address that. And you'll see the teachers' unions and other advocates pushing. I don't think it'll be a charter, non-charter school, public school fight so much as it'll be, how do we, what's the next iteration of model for public schools? And what have we learned, right? What have we learned, and how does that affect us? I mean, I've got a 12-year-old daughter who thinks, gee whiz, she can do all her work in 2 hours now. Why does she need to go to school, right? So, there are going to be some, I think there are going to be some, for all these institutions in Florida, businesses, but education certainly one, healthcare being another one. There'll be some, I think, real lessons learned and ideas generated that'll, I think, swamp the legislative process next year.
We have time for just 2 more questions. The first one is related to education from Vivian. Is there an increase of monies for the public schools or the budget, or have budget concerns reduced funding for these schools?
The latter. Jeff?
Yeah, ask me that question again, Patty, clarify.
The question is there an increase of monies for public schools? Or have budget concerns reduced funding for public schools?
Well, you know, I mean, not to dismiss the constant money grab from charter schools, public schools. That fight continues, obviously. You did see, listen, the teacher pay increase of $500 million. That's very positive. To have the Florida Education Association say something positive about the legislature was eye-opening. So there's that money. One would assume, that's a one-time. It's a pay increase. That's to be continued. But again, I think the technology issues and physical plant issues and are going to require funding. Now, some of that may come from the feds. We may have a big hole in the Florida budget, by next November. I mean, billions.
Right. Well, that's right.
So everyone's
And
going
that's why yeah. That's why I would err on the side of money being a little tight across the board.
They also had a $47 base student allocation increase.
Yeah, that's big.
Okay. And one more question. This is sort of an interesting technical question. Is there something we can do to assist with legislative analysis of bills? It seems as though bills without an analysis don't usually pass. Now, I do know that each legislator or each committee chair usually has a legislative person or a staff member on whose duty it is to analyze the bills. But all bills are not analyzed. We look at lobby tools and we see that there's a bill analysis, yes, but there's no bill analysis for this bill. So Jeff and Taylor, could you explain that process a bit?
Yeah.
Why do we see an analysis of some bills and not of other bills?
Right. So a bill will only get analysis once it's referenced to a committee. And particularly once it's referenced to the committee, not just from the general committee assignments, but once it's agended to a committee of reference. And then there's a post-committee analysis. Largely at the first thought, that stays the same unless there's some major underlying substantive change or change by way of amendment. But throughout the process, that's why there's a pre-committee meeting analysis and a post-committee analysis, because the bill can change throughout the process, as you guys know.
Mm-hmm. We do. Well, that is pretty much all the time we have for questions, and we have a number of questions that we did not get to. We will certainly address these as we can, because we have recorded this call and we'll be able to look at all the questions received in the chat box. I definitely want to thank Jeff Sharkey, Taylor Beal, and Lauren Gallo for their work for us. And it's really been a great learning experience for us, because we have found out that by taking on too many issues, it reduces our chances for success. So this has been a great way for us to learn to really whittle down the number of bills we follow and get behind or oppose, because our chances for success increase, and we're not in danger of diluting our brand. And I can't thank you all enough, and we really look forward to our work going forward and having you all join us today. Taylor, congratulations on your brand new baby. That is absolutely wonderful news. And we wish you all—
Thank you.
Absolutely. We wish you all safety and health, and hopefully this virus will be behind us soon. But in the meantime, thank you again and take good care.
Thank you. Appreciate
And
it.
wear your mask.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Yes,
Patty.
wear your mask and
Stay
gloves.
safe. Yeah, stay safe for sure.
Thank you.
Take care.
And everyone in the league that joined us today, we had a number of you, well over 200 on this call. Thank you for joining us. We'll have another Lunch and Learn next week, which we will be announcing the topic of very soon. We're very excited about it. So thanks for joining us. We'll continue these lunch and learns every Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern time from now on. So we look forward to seeing
Looking forward. Evolution is good.
Absolutely. Looking
you.
forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.